This is a Hot Pie Media original.
So I think that it's about even more than performance. It's about what kind of life do you want to live? Who do you want to become? You know, in the book I write, the things that you pay attention to are what you're going to become. The seeds that you water are the seeds that grow, because we like to think that like we're these autonomous beings with all this willpower and control, and we have some of that, but you know, just like if you eat junk food all day, you're not going to feel good. If you pay attention to junk content all day, your mind's not going to be good.
Hi, I'm Erik Korem, and this is The Blueprint. I've spent my life helping Olympic gold medalists, NFL and NCAA athletes be the best at their craft. Now I'm taking that experience and translating it into your life. This podcast is for busy professionals and household CEOs who care deeply about their family, career, and their health. There's an ocean of content to wade through, but I do the heavy lifting for you and distill cutting-edge science, leadership, and life skills into simple tactics optimized for your lifestyle and goals. Brad Stulberg is a researcher, writer, and coach on human performance, sustainable success, and well-being. His works appear in the New York Times, Wall Street Journal, Washington Post, Wired, Forbes, and other national and international outlets. Brad also has a regular column in Outside magazine. Today we're discussing his latest book, The Practice of Groundedness. In this episode, we discuss how you can move from living in a state of anxiety to lasting peace, self-compassion, and resilience. We also discuss how being patient will get you to your goal faster, why building community is important, and how to embrace vulnerability. This podcast is loaded with practical wisdom for how to consistently pursue difficult goals without living in a perpetual state of burnout and overwhelm. I think you are going to absolutely love this episode. Both Brad and I got vulnerable about times we've had panic attacks, and I'll tell you what, this book was really helpful for me as I've already started putting some of these practices into place in my own life. But before we get to my interview with Brad, I want to let you in on something really cool that I'm building. If you love to exercise, but you aren't sure exactly how hard or how long you should exercise each day, then you should check out my free app, Aim7. We have this cool feature where we provide you with a custom exercise recommendation based upon your current state of adaptability, or simply put, how much exercise your body can adapt to that day. We do this by combining your wearable tech data with our decades of high-performance expertise. By following these recommendations, you'll be able to prevent burnout and experience long-term improvements in your fitness. The great thing is, this is all layered on top of the exercise programs that you already love to do. So whether you love Peloton, Apple Fitness Plus, or your favorite HIIT program at your local gym, our recommendations work with what you enjoy doing. So if you have a wearable device like an Apple Watch, Whoop, or Oura Ring, then go to www.aim7.com. That's AIM7.com to get early and free access to our exclusive program. Aim7 starts small and starts with you. Your health data, your values to get to your thriving life. But now it's time to lean in and learn from the best. Brad, thank you so much for joining us today. I appreciate your time.
Hey man, it's great to be here.
You've written some very successful books about high performance. You've coached athletes, executives, entrepreneurs on how to perform better. And in this book that you just wrote, The Practice of Groundedness, you really tapped into something that I think plagues driven people, including myself. And you coined a phrase, heroic individualism. What is that?
So heroic individualism, I define as a constant game of one-upsmanship against both yourself and or others. So you're constantly trying to beat yourself or others, which inherently isn't bad, paired with a limiting belief that measurable achievement is the main arbiter of success. And also the trap that you think that you'll arrive if you accomplish something, but when you get there, you realize that the goalpost is always 10 yards down the field.
I can't tell you how many times I've been around coaches or elite athletes that they get the thing and they're really unhappy.
Yeah. Or just empty. There's this line in Ray Allen, the basketball player's autobiography, where he talks about how the day after he won his first NBA championship, he's never felt so empty because he thought that he'd get this thing that he'd been working so hard for and that it would somehow radically fulfill him or take care of all of his insecurities and what have you. And that lasted for about 12 hours for Ray Allen.
So what's the solution for this?
Oh man, that's what I try to tease out in the book. I coined this term groundedness, which is really about trying to create a life that is fulfilling in this moment, not to the exclusion of going after big goals, trying to get things out ahead of you, but in a way where you can really be present and be patient for what's happening right now, and to have a now be enough. And I think it's this big paradox that is particularly striking in the high performance world, where a lot of people think that if they want to get better, they have to be really hungry. They have to really put their neck out there, leave it all on the line. And sometimes that's true. Actually, I'd argue often that's true. But that doesn't go against starting from a place of already being enough. And I think that, again, we think that you kind of have to be unhappy with yourself to get better, where a lot of the research shows that if you start from a place of enoughness, of groundedness, you actually improve your chance of performance, at least sustainably.
So you're not discounting that hard work needs to be done.
Oh, no. Yeah. This isn't like a book that says, and there's nothing wrong with it for people that choose this, but this isn't a book that says like, go live in a monastery for 10 years to get grounded. Another way to think about it in high performance talk is it's really a book that takes this notion of process over outcome and unpacks it and says, what is it truly like to not only focus on the process, but to actually live in the process? Because you zoom out in whether you're an athlete, an executive, an artist, a podcaster, like outcomes only account for 0.1111 or 0.00001% of your life, right? You're on the gold medal stand for 3 minutes. Your book hits the bestseller list. That's an instant in time. Whereas the pursuit of those things, that's what actually makes up your whole life. And it's really easy to get caught up thinking that those outcomes are what the game is all about, but they're just such a small part of it.
No, I don't know if Nick Saban was thinking about groundedness or Bill Belichick when they started talking about the process. And I worked in that tree. I worked under Jimbo Fisher, who was, right under Saban, and then Bill O'Brien, Bill Belichick. And, it's all about really the Saban thing is the process. And that's why I have friends that have like worked for him, like in high ranking positions, and like he wins the national championship. And as soon as it's over, it's like he's talking about the recruiting class.
Mm-hmm.
And I think he literally lives in this perpetual state of process. I personally, I just, just to get vulnerable for a second, like, people talk about panic attacks.
Yeah.
And I'd never experienced one until several years ago. And it's like you're so caught up in the moment and the immediate outcome. I didn't know what was happening to me. First of all, I had like 10 people quit in a matter of like 8 days. This place I was working at, and I was on vacation.
Okay.
And I found myself in my car with my wife, and I was just so overwhelmed with emotion. I was having a hard time breathing. And I was like, am I dying?
Yeah, they're not fun.
No. And as I started reading your book, there were certain things that popped out. And one of those I want to highlight later that was like, oh my gosh. Like if I had been thinking about this at the time, and I'll hit on that in a little bit, but you kind of have your own story too. I mean, you've worked with some of the best in the world. You're providing this, but you had an experience with OCD that kind of led to this book. Can you talk about that for a minute?
Yeah. So I was just turning 30 years old and had no prior experience with mental illness, no real history of it in my family, at least none that I knew about. And everything was going really well in my life. Published my first book, was doing well. I'm starting to build this thriving coaching practice. And I too had a panic attack. In my case, looking back, I probably let my blood sugar get a little bit low. So I started to feel some sensations of lightheadedness and tingling. And logically, I'm like, oh, I think my blood sugar's low. Like, I did a tough workout. I really didn't eat much after. So I quickly grabbed a Snickers bar. But at that point, it wasn't about my body. My brain was in overdrive. And like you, it just spiraled. And then you get worried that you're dying. And then the worry builds on itself. And it escalates. And most people have panic attacks and they come down from them. And it's a really shitty 24 hours or 2 days. And then they move on with their life. But in my case, it really blossomed into full-fledged obsessive compulsive disorder, where I was constantly having these intrusive thoughts and feelings about, am I going to have another panic attack? Is something wrong with my heart? Is something wrong with my adrenal system? And in OCD, it's characterized by repetitive, intrusive thoughts and feelings, and they can shift themes. So for a while, it was around panic and health. And then it shifted very much to, mental health. Like, am I going to be like this forever? Am I going to become depressed? What's the meaning of life if I'm constantly feeling like this? And I was completely debilitated by and stuck in these cycles of intrusive thoughts and just god awful feelings of anxiety, sadness, emptiness, for a good 8 months. It was pretty rough. It wasn't like peak level for 8 months. I'm super fortunate. I got help immediately. So a better way to say it is perhaps that the journey from holy shit, what's happening to my brain, to starting to feel like I was walking out of the woods was about 8 months.
Wow. Yeah, it's a difficult spot to be in. I had it happen again, and it was kind of like a week leading up to it. Like I was going to walk one day and I just got really dizzy.
Yeah.
And I had to stop. And it was like one thing led to another thing, and then finally it just happened.
Yeah, because you're kind of when you stopped, was there a part of you, whether consciously or subconsciously, that then started getting worried? Like, oh, am I going to have a panic attack, or is this going to be something more?
I knew what it was.
Okay.
And my heart was racing. And I was resting heart rate was like 120, where my resting heart rate's usually in the 50s. And I was like, geez, this is not good. And it goes back to the things that we're about to discuss. I was not in the moment. I was months ahead, not realizing that what I was going through right now is a normal course in a startup.
Yeah.
And having lived my life in sports, where like every Friday or every Saturday or Sunday, you're graded in front of the world. I was living on these short time scales. Not
where you had that feedback.
Yeah, you had the feedback loops, but my expectation was it's got to be right in 6 days. And it was just a bad way of thinking. I wasn't anchoring myself on reality. It took me adjusting some stuff. So the principles in this book are phenomenal. I mean, it's like, so let's just talk about some of those. One of them I really like is accept where you are to get to where you want to go. Like, and there was a phrase that comes out later, but I want to bring it up now because I've started using this already. This is what is happening right now. I'm doing the best I can. And I don't want to hog the mic because I want you to talk about this, but that right there was worth the whole book for me.
Oh man, that's so great to hear. So let me tell you about the genesis of this phrase. It's embarrassing, but it's not, because it's something that I think everyone goes through in their life, and particularly as it relates to being a parent. So we just had my first son, my only kid right now.
Congratulations.
He was no, this is like back in the day when I came up with this phrase.
Okay.
Now he's 3.5. He's
Okay.
like a little boy. He's great. But we just had him, and he was a terrible sleeper. And I was just getting out of like the thick of my brain being in OCD world. So I was still pretty fragile. And he was just up all the time. And the first couple of weeks, all right, this is what we signed up for. But when it's a month, 2 months, 3 months, every night waking up, I started to really ruminate, and I'd have thoughts as I'm waking up. I'm going to be tired tomorrow. This is the 5th night in a row with no sleep. And all the way to like, did we make a mistake? How long is this going to last? Am I ever going to sleep again? And like you, I'm a performance guy, so I know that sleep is really important. And what I realized was that it wasn't my kids crying that was keeping me up. It was all the stuff I was projecting onto it, and the self-talk and the delusion about what would happen the next day. That's what was keeping me up. So with the help of the coach and therapist that I work with at the time, I basically came up with this mantra of, it's like when my brain goes there, I just need to say, this is what's happening right now. I'm doing the best that I can. And what that does, there's nothing magical about those words, but it snaps you back into the present moment. And once I started doing that, guess what? I go into his room, I change his diaper, give him a kiss, and we both fall back asleep. And I went from being up for 2 to 4 minutes to 2 to 4 hours, because it wasn't the crying baby. That's what was waking me up. But what was leading to the distress was the fighting against it, the repression, the anger, the judgment. And I give an example that any new parent knows with an infant, but we do this so often with all sorts of things in our life. I'll say one more quick thing before I stop hogging the mic. There's this parable that I include in the book from ancient Eastern wisdom traditions where they talk about not letting the arrow hit you twice. And the first arrow is the thing that happens. That's the baby up in the middle of the night. It's the, the shitty weather on your race day, if you're a triathlete, whatever it is. The second arrow, the third, fourth, and fifth arrow, that is your judgment of the situation. You're denying it. You're getting upset about it. And these ancient wisdom traditions teach that it's the second, third, fourth, and fifth arrow that actually hurt worse than the first arrow. And this is what's happening right now. I'm doing the best that I can. To me, that's about acknowledging that the first arrow hit you, and then not firing all these additional arrows at yourself.
Brad, it was genius because I'm using it all the time because I'm in technology now. I left sports and have this tech company, and like, man, I'm not a coder, and things happen, right? Like, boom, something blows up, and I'm like, you want to get reactionary. That's not solving anything. Okay, you have a bug. Apple has bugs, like, so what are we going to do about it now? And we can talk about mindfulness later, but this kind of brings that into like, where is my attention? My friend, Dr. Peter Haberl, he's a senior sports psychologist at the USOC. He coined a phrase, attention is the currency of performance. It's so true, because what has your attention, that's where you're going to go.
Yeah. I would I'd take a broader swing, and I'd say like attention is the currency of your life. Think about it, right? We think about life in terms of how long are we going to live time, but time is just a man-made concept. Like the actual real thing is attention. So I think that it's about even more than performance. It's about what kind of life do you want to live? Who do you want to become? In the book I write, the things that you pay attention to are what you're going to become. The seeds that you water are the seeds that grow, because we like to think that like we're these autonomous beings with all this willpower and control, and we have some of that, but just like if you eat junk food all day, you're not going to feel good. If you pay attention to junk content all day, your mind's not going to be good.
No, exactly right. So accepting where you are to where you want to go to, is there anything else you want to say on that?
Yeah. Again, it's advice from my 3.5-year-old Theo. He says, start from the start. And he says it when he gets pissed off when like we're playing a game and, a block falls over. He's like, no, I want to start from the start. But I've started saying that to myself in terms of big projects in my own life, because it's easy to get ahead of yourself, or to constantly be looking down the field, or to wish that you were, further along than you are. And in the moment, it feels good to delude yourself into thinking that. but it catches up with you. So every day it's just a practice of like, start from the start from where you are. An honest appraisal of where you are is the first step to getting where you want to go. And we live in a culture that tells us that we should practice delusion and numb our emotions, especially our challenging ones, with food and drink, and, watch reality TV to numb whatever's going on in our actual lives. Like, the whole culture works against acceptance. I think a big part of consumerism works against acceptance. It operates on this notion that if something's wrong, you should just buy something and that'll make it better. But, unless we're talking about buying medications for like your strep throat, there's not too much that you can buy to make something better.
No, there's buying, and then there's that little feeling of glee, and then there's buyer's remorse.
Yeah,
you're dealing
exactly.
with the guilt.
So yeah, acceptance is intimately linked to presence, as you pointed out. But yeah, it's realizing and being kind to yourself that we live in a culture that like would rather us think delusionally, or all this like positive thinking stuff. And listen, there's nothing wrong with positive thinking or self-talk. Like, when things are going well, roll with it. Like, ride those waves while they're high. But when things aren't going well, that stuff just makes it worse, because then you just judge yourself. Well, why am I feeling down? Or why is this situation shitty? And those are those second, third, and fourth arrows, instead of just being like, all right, like, here's what's in front of me. Here's what I can do about it. Here's what I can't. I'm going to focus on what I can.
I'll give you a little practical thing. I was working with the 75th Ranger Regiment, and I was talking to their cognitive psych, and I said, mindfulness is something you practice, but how do you get it into the field? And she said she tells her Rangers, when they're dealing with something very painful, to bring attention, you bring attention to the breath, but what she tells them to do is like feel the air coming in and out of your nostrils, like literally sense it. And so I do jujitsu, and I was in a jiu-jitsu tournament, and I'm a blue belt, and I show up, and they're like, well, Erik, there's not enough blue belt. Anyways, they were like, you're going to go against the purples and the browns. That's like a bad day, okay? Those are people that are 2 to 4 years ahead of you, and they were in a heavier weight class. So I got to the final, I like won, and I got to the final match against this like Ivan Drago of an individual, and he gets me in what's called the mount. And it's like they're on top of you. If you've ever seen MMA, this is when they would start grounding and pounding, but you can't do that in jiu-jitsu. And I'm sitting there, and I'm in a lot of pain, and he's on top of me. I just start like, okay, I'm like, accept where you are right now. And I started breathing through my nose, and I was able to, I didn't get tapped or submitted, but I was able to endure the suffering, right? And like, I don't know, I was just thinking about that as you're saying this, because like, it's okay, it's going to suck. But like, what do you do now? And I think we get stuck in this perpetual loop of it sucks, instead of actually like bringing our attention to the moment, regaining that attention and energy, and then like, okay, now I'm going to take action.
Yeah, and that's that beautiful parable about the arrows that I talk about in the book, because in your case, the first arrow is, Ivan Drago on top of you.
Yeah.
The second, third, and fourth arrows are you being like I'm never going to get out of this. Like, this guy's going to break my neck. I should probably tap out. Panic. And that stuff is worse than the fact that he's on top of you. He's on top of you. All right. Like you said, this is what's happening right now. I'm going to focus on my breath. And if it really gets too painful, then I'll hit the ground and I'll tap. Yeah. But I'm not going to freak out about it. And it's the freaking out about things that's often worse than the thing itself.
Yeah. Your book is so good for that. I mean, it just drew attention to all these stories in my head. I'm reliving. I'm like, yeah, that's so true. You also talk about being patient and how patience will get you there faster. Like the rabbit and the hare, right? Mm-hmm. I mean, the tortoise and the hare. Rabbit and the hare are the same thing. The tortoise and the hare, like, why is patience so important to getting to your final destination?
Well, again, this requires practice in swimming upstream in the current ethos that is all about hacks and silver bullets and overnight breakthroughs. When in fact, if you look at the research, it shows that the only hack that really works is like hacking at it consistently day in and day out. And what looks like an overnight breakthrough on the outside is often the result of years, if not decades, of hard work. A few studies to bring to bear here. The first looked at entrepreneurs in tech. This bodes really well for you, man. So we like to think that in order to be successful in tech, you've got to be young and you've got to move fast and break things.
Yeah, I'm old.
Well,
go ahead.
What the research shows is that the average age of a successful founder, judged by the valuation of their company at IPO, or if they're pre-IPO by their net income, is 45 years old. So 45, that's so different than Mark Zuckerberg up there on the stage. What did he say in like 2011? You got to be young and smart to be in tech, and just how he equated those two things together. The second interesting study, and this is back to your old wheelhouse in high performance sport, what we see is that the majority of training injuries come when there's not a solid foundation and there is an increase in volume, duration, intensity that is something like 30% of the trailing average over the last 4 weeks. And what is that if not being patient? Like, whenever we try to get ahead of ourselves, whether it's in starting a company, whether it's in sport, whether it's in a romantic relationship, much like, the buying stuff and tweeting, it feels really good for a minute. You get this rush of crushing it, and then you often end up broken. So in the book, I'm like, yeah, move fast and break things, you often end up broken. In a lot of like the biggest tech debacles of the past few years have been just that. Like, you think about Theranos and Elizabeth Holmes.
Boom. I was just thinking the same thing.
They moved really fast and they broke everything.
And there was some fraud in there.
Yeah, there was also some fraud in there because it's that addiction. There's a lot of fraud in there. That's addiction to like that getting there quickly.
Can I tell you how encouraging it was when I read that study? Because I'm 41.
Entrepreneurs.
Yeah, when I read
so
that,
you still got time. You might fail twice before you succeed at 45. Yeah. I won't tell your VC that, but
no. We're going to take a break for just a moment to talk about how you can get exclusive content designed for living a high-performance life. Every week, I send out a newsletter called Adaptation. In this newsletter, I provide you with information and resources to improve your health, well-being, and performance. I cover topics like sleep, stress, exercise, nutrition, and mental performance. You can sign up today for free for this newsletter at www.erikkorem.com. Now, back to the show. No, but you're right. Like, I read that and it was such an encouragement to me, Brad, because I'm like, I'm 41. Most people are like, what are you doing? You have a great career. And when I read that, I was like, I didn't do the research I didn't care about that. I cared about the problem. But anyways, thank you for putting that in the book because that was a huge encouragement to me.
Yeah. And you know what? Like, I'm a realist here, right? Everything in the book is evidence-based. So I don't put on like woo-woo glasses and be like, oh yeah, like you can do anything when you're old. Like, here's why that's the case. Yeah. Nerding out for a bit. Imagine you've got these two curves. In one curve is like raw, clever, cognitive flexibility, street smarts. That peaks for most people between 25 and 30. Once you hit 30, your ability to problem solve and think really quickly on the fly starts declining. But you've got this other curve, which is wisdom and pattern recognition and life experience and empathy. And that curve, it just grows and grows as you get older. So I think the reason that a lot of people in tech crush it at 45 is because they still have enough of that really quick thinking left. They're not 65 yet, but they've also gained a lot of wisdom. And I think it's a really good model to think about aging and how the older you get, the more likely you are to succeed and thrive in areas that value a lot of wisdom. This is why poets often do their best work at like 80, because poetry is a wisdom field. This is Leonard Cohen's last album before he dies that is so profound, and it is just down to its essence, which is very different than a 25-year-old, crushing chess, which values like, the real like quick cognition. So I think midlife at 45, these two curves cross, if you will.
No, that's really smart. That's why I think prime earning years are in your 50s.
Yeah, I wouldn't be surprised if that's it.
Besides climbing the ladder and, moving from, whatever to manager to et cetera, but like now you have wisdom to apply to situations. So your leadership abilities have improved because now you can rely on wisdom. That's a really great point. You talk about
wisdom and like you look at a Tom Brady, right? Like he doesn't have the athleticism.
He's never had the athleticism.
Right. But now he's got even more wisdom.
Right.
And if you're so extraordinary, like when Michael Vick was first in the league, like his talent curve was like off the freaking charts. So he was a dominant quarterback. But most people settle into their best after some period of time learning. And that's where patience is just so important. And then on the whole breakthrough thing, if you see someone with a hammer pounding a stone and you see them take a huge pound and the stone breaks, well, the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, everyone on Twitter rushes in and says, look at this breakthrough. And they all photograph it. And they ask the person that broke the stone about all the might behind that pound. But when no one covers is the 3 years that he was sitting there pounding it every single day. And that is so true for so many big endeavors. Like we don't see how the sausage gets made. All we see is the sausage. We don't see all the pounds against the rock, that there was very little, if any, observable progress. We just see the crack. And I think that in the book, I try to correct that perspective that says like lots of meaningful things take a lot of consistent effort and there are no hacks.
I think that's a tweet right there for you, my friend. No, it's really good. Something you talk about, I think Brene Brown has really popularized this idea of vulnerability. Not many leaders or high performers like to talk about being vulnerable because they see vulnerable as weakness. Like the vulnerability in the defense is X. Don't let that's tactical. But why should we embrace vulnerability?
Well, I'll tell you why. It makes you a lot tougher and it makes you a lot more genuinely confident in yourself because you can trust yourself. If you're not vulnerable, then deep down, your psyche, your subconscious mind knows that you're lying to yourself. And eventually, whatever you're lying to yourself about, it's going to rise up to the surface and completely rattle you. Your ability to say, I've had panic attacks. They suck. I have a sense of when they're coming, but I'm not really sure. Inextricably, I am positive, makes it so much less likely that you'll have more severe panic attacks. You still might, but it's a lot less likely because you're not lying to yourself. You're like, oh yeah, like this is a part of me that I wish wasn't so, but here it is. It could happen. And the minute that you do that, the power that the panic attack has over you is gone. And I think we spend so much time trying not to go to those places or trying to cover up those cracks, thinking that if we just cover them up, they won't get us, but they inevitably do. There's this beautiful story in ancient Greek literature that I tell in the book about this god Pan. And Pan lived just outside of the village boundary. And villagers, sometimes they'd get lost and they'd stumble upon Pan. And Pan was freaking terrifying. And they'd start running away from this terrifying god. And they were so scared that they would start tripping and falling. And eventually they would be paralyzed by fear until they died. Now, other villagers, a brave few, they intentionally went to see Pan. And the villagers that intentionally went to see Pan, when they got there, Pan would bestow upon them strength, courage, and wisdom. And this is an allegory for vulnerability. If we try to run away from the stuff about ourselves that makes us feel insecure or weak or that we fear, eventually, when we confront it by accident, it is going to destroy us. Whereas if we can go to those places, sometimes with the help of friends, family, a coach, a therapist, sometimes you need all that help, but if you can go to those places, they don't scare you as much. And this rises all the way up to the ultimate fear for most people, which is death. And like on the other side of death is life and love. And if you can really think about death and like confront it, you don't have to do it all the time. It's not always pleasant. Well, there's nothing better to refocus you on like what actually matters in your life. Whereas if you push that stuff away, that's where you get to your deathbed and you're like, holy shit, what have I been doing for the last, if you're lucky, 80, 85, 90 years?
Having a hard time coming up with something right now because that's pretty powerful. Like most people don't anchor on the finality of things.
Yeah.
And you have to come to peace with that. I know I have. Did a long time ago. You still have little things that creep up, but that's normal. I go back to combat like jiu-jitsu because I'm thinking right now I'm competing in Worlds in November with my wife in Vegas.
Okay. Sweet.
And there's one,
I said sweet.
Oh, I thought
like
you said
good.
same thing. I thought you were saying you did it too. I was like,
No,
awesome.
We're about to see each other there. We'll be really vulnerable.
That'd
together.
be really cool. But like, there's one thing about what they call it rolling against somebody that you know, or I go into an academy, I have an open mat, not as much. But then when you step in with somebody you don't know, you don't know their skill, you don't know how strong they are, you don't know anything. There is this heightened sense of, you feel your heart rate goes up, and it's the person that can embrace that and be like, okay, now I'm going to operate in this environment. And I've been thinking about that a lot lately and like trying to go there in my head. Do you have any ideas for, this is just maybe a little off topic, but for dealing with those pressure moments of like, I practice mindfulness. Is that when you go back to the breath and then you start re-anchoring? But like when you know that you've got this thing, a big board meeting, that do you embrace your vulnerability? Like what is it that can kind of get you back on track when those things come?
So I think that first off, I'm glad you asked this question. It's a really good one. Because I think everyone struggles with this stuff, whether it, like you said, is a jiu-jitsu match or a board meeting. If you have training in techniques that can help you calm down and regulate, such as mindfulness or some other breath work, and you are really well trained in those things, it's a great time to lean on them. Most people don't have that level of training.
Right.
So I'm a big believer in actually accepting whatever nerves, anxiety you're feeling and just letting it be there, not fighting it, and waiting for the gun to go off, meaning waiting for the official to say start. If you're at the board meeting, waiting for the first slide. Because once the gun goes off, that stuff tends to melt away. My guess is that you're not actually anxious when you're fighting someone. You're anxious when you see that badass across from you. And I think kind of like acceptance. Like I would just let it be there. I still get sometimes before like big public speaking, I get nervous. I don't do jiu-jitsu. There's probably another level of vulnerability, but I do strength training and powerlifting. And when there's a weight on my back that hasn't been on my back, I get scared.
Yeah.
Because you don't know what's going to happen. Like it makes you vulnerable.
Can I get out of the hole?
Right. Exactly. But when I'm in the hole, I'm not scared. I'm just in the hole. So
you're thinking stay tight.
Right. Like 360 breathing, baby, like push into that belt. So I try not to worry about whatever I'm feeling on the way in. I just wait for the gun to go off. Now that only works if you're prepared. If you're not prepared, well, then you're lying to yourself and you're going to be scared the whole time. But if you've done the work and you're prepared, it works really well. Definitely public speaking. Like I'll get sweaty palms, I'll get nervous still sometimes, depending on the group, how big it is. But once I'm up there talking, I'm not nervous because now I'm talking about material I know.
Yeah. I don't know if you know who Sir Chris Hoy is.
No.
He's the greatest cyclist ever, 8-time Olympic gold medalist for the UK. And this is something I use when I talk to people about this is like Chris Hoy, they knighted him when he was talking about what it felt like to race in Olympic finals. He said it felt like he was going to the gallows. This is the greatest cyclist ever. But what would he do? He would grip the steering wheel. He would feel his clips and his feet in the clips. Like he would move to these tactile sensations to bring himself back to the moment and then execute. And so this has just been really on my mind lately. My wife and I have been talking about this. Like, hey, like you're going to feel this way. Why don't you lay down? Like we have these, like I have techniques, but like for dealing with this, but like lay down and I want you to start visualizing this. You know what I'm saying? Like put yourself in the situation, weighing in, putting your belt on, turning around, bowing in, like know what you're going to do, and then have that 1, 2, 3, and then boom. I love that. Just if you're trained and you're prepared, let the gun go off. That's a great way of looking at it.
And I'll say that to myself sometimes too. Like on the way to a big speaking event, if I like feel nerves, anxiety, I'm just like, all right, like whatever, like just wait for the gun to go off. Just like get to the start line of the race. You might be nervous on the start line. That's fine. But once the gun goes off, you're in the race. Then you're just racing.
It's go time.
Yeah. And the cyclist, I'd be curious, and maybe you know this, was the feeling of going to the gallows, I have a prediction, about like the competition, or was it just about the amount of pain he was about to put himself into?
It was like the competition. Like there was so much stress, he felt like he was going to die. You know,
Yeah.
and there's this myth that the best in the world don't feel pressure. It's totally false.
No, they do. They just take it for the ride with them, and
Yes.
they wait for the gun to go off.
It's facilitating, not debilitating.
Yeah. And the visualization stuff, like you said, there are techniques, and if you're really good at those, they help. And I still think this is like that wisdom curve. There's nothing like the real thing. And the more that you do something, the less fear there is. And sometimes you just have to work your way through it. Because you think about like clinical approaches to treating really bad anxiety, right? Like if you suffer from like panic disorder, where you're having all kinds of panic attacks, the treatment is to actually have panic attacks and not do anything about it. Because eventually your mind-body system realizes that you're not going to die. And then once you feel your heart rate, instead of freaking out about it, over time, you're just like, oh, that's just my heart beating a little fast. And then guess what? You calm down. But the only way to get there is to go through. I once had the honor to interview the world record holder in free diving, and just talking about his journey from being really anxious before he broke the water to like being extremely calm and zen. There was no breathing practice. There was no spiritual journey. It was simply, I've done this so many times now that I know what to expect. So I think like it's back to acceptance. There's accepting that, yes, there are these techniques that can help, and I might still feel nervous and anxious, and I just have to take it along for the ride, wait for the gun to go off. And if I enjoy the thing enough, keep doing it. And as I keep doing it, that anxiety goes away.
I remember when I was at Florida State under Jimbo Fisher, every Thursday was 2-minute offense. And when we were really good, we had the number one defense in the country. And if 2-minute was like, that's like last 2 minutes of the game, you got to go score and win. And it was like crazy intense. And and there was days like the offense couldn't move the ball. And we had like some really good players on offense. And we trained it so much. We were playing a Thursday night at Virginia Tech, which is a really hard place to play. And this is when Frank Beamer was still there. And we were down by like, I think it was 3 or 4 with less than a minute. And I'll never forget being next to the offensive huddle, and EJ Manuel, our quarterback, looks at the guys and goes, "Hey, guys, this is Thursday practice. Let's go." Walked out on the field, boom, 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 win the game. And it's like that you're right. Like if you train it enough and you train it well enough, it's not just training. The training's got to be target specific.
Yep.
Then you can be ready to go. I want to move on real quick to 2 other things I thought were really interesting. One of the things I didn't think you were going to bring up in this book that you did, which I thought was fascinating, was the idea of building community.
Mm-hmm.
And, and you talk about, building faith, being a part of a faith community and just different things like what community can look like. And there was a phrase of this faith community I was part of where it said like life together is better than life alone.
Ooh, I love that.
Yeah. So let's talk about why is it so important to have a community?
So for all kinds of reasons, the first and foremost is that we are hardwired as a species to thrive in community. Part of how primates evolved all the way down to sapiens, us, is that we can do things together that we can't do alone. And that's what's allowed our species to survive and to thrive. And we have all these technologies to be able to do so. So like storytelling. Storytelling is how you communicate in like deep, meaningful ways about past and future. And on the savannah, when we're evolving, that storytelling was, oh, there was this big lion over there and we have to be prepared. Well, that's what allows a band of 10, 20, 30 people to fend off the predator. And same thing with hunter and gathering, to get the prey. You didn't know who was going to get lucky. So you better share as a tribe, because if you don't share, then eventually everyone's going to starve during periods of famine. So it's very much in our DNA that we thrive off of connection to other people. Loneliness and isolation has many of the same clinical symptoms as anxiety or depression. And again, that goes all the way back to evolution. It's because when we're lonely, our brain goes back to being on the savannah back in evolution and being like, oh my gosh, I can't sleep because I'm alone. So who's going to look out for me if there's a predator? Or I'm super anxious, I'm alone. What if my hunt isn't successful today? How am I going to eat? So that hasn't left our DNA. So we are very hardwired to feel safe in a sense of belonging with groups. And the second reason it's important is because life is really hard. And when shit hits the fan and you don't have the strength to hold yourself up, it's really helpful to have other people that can hold you up. And I'll tell you what gives most people more meaning than anything else is having the privilege and the honor to help someone else up when they fall down.
No question.
And it's not just the lows, but the highs too, man. It is so important to have someone when you're crushing it to provide some gravity for you, because otherwise, like, you go off in outer space and the fall from outer space is a long, long way. So, you know, it's both about like the lows, the highs, and then just our hardwiring. And community is tough these days. I mean, even before COVID. So certainly with COVID, there's added levels of complexity. With vaccination, hopefully that's becoming a lot easier for most people. But, you know, it's really easy for community to get crowded out if you become too focused on like efficiency or optimization, because community is really inefficient.
Takes time
And effort. You know, Eric, like, are we going to meet up? Oh yeah, we'll meet up. Well, we have to schedule. Well, then something comes up. Well, let's just do a phone call. And oh crap, I don't ever set, like, let's just text, let's just email. And then we fall into these patterns of like doing the thing with the least resistance, but that doesn't really cultivate a deep bond. So I'm a pragmatist here, because I do think there's something to say about like optimization and efficiency. It's just that it's gotten so far out of balance, I think, where we're so focused on pushing ahead on optimization and efficiency that there needs to be a little bit of a reconfiguration for some more emphasis on community. And you can make it easy. So yes, there's like the community of like really people that care deeply about the same things as you, but sometimes those people, they don't live in your state. So I'm a big fan of just like getting to know your neighbors, even if you really don't have much in common with them, because that's easy. That's more efficient. And guess what? Like when your kid's sick at night and you need someone to watch your dog when you go to the hospital, it's probably going to be your neighbors. Yeah. It's not going to be the other world expert on neuroscience. So I think that, you know, it's a blessing that we're so globally connected that you and I can get in touch and have this conversation within a matter of days, but it's also really important to have local roots.
I'm with you. Actually, I have a group of friends from our church, and we were like, hey, let's do this. Like, it's hard to go deep with everybody. So what if we had like 4 or 5 families that were connected? We all have kids the same age. And then like once a month, it's somebody's job to like create an event that happens. And we all go do something together. And then there's like, you're going deeper. Now you're with somebody, so you have the ability to like have accountability, you know, speak into their life, and that takes an investment of time. And I really love that chapter because that really connected with me. I think everybody has realized that digital community alone doesn't get the job done. No. And in COVID, we were craving. I'll never forget the first time I gave somebody a hug that was outside of my family.
Yeah.
And that was like, it was actually when we went back to the jiu-jitsu gym, and I was like, I saw this guy, I shook his hand kind of nervously. I was like, come here, man. Yeah. I gave him a hug, and I was like, we're about to roll anyways. And it was kind of this like, whoa, this big rush. And you're like, man, we need other people. Brad, our time's kind of running out, and I want to just let people know there's some stuff in here that we didn't even get to, like productivity versus productive activity, which you got to read about this, how exercise plays a role. I thought the book was beautifully set up because you break down these constituent parts and then you talk about how to put it all together in reality. And I strongly recommend this book, The Practice of Groundedness. They can get it off Amazon, right? Anywhere else?
Yeah, Amazon, Barnes & Noble, independent bookstores. Amazon randomly does price drops on books, and they just did a price drop here. So today, I don't know if this will be the case when y'all are listening to this, but it's like 40% off right now on Amazon.
Oh my gosh.
So if it still is, no excuse, get it. But you can get it anywhere they got books.
I can put a story out on Instagram right now about that. As like a prequel to the podcast.
Yeah, we could do it, man. I appreciate it. It's funny you mentioned that. Like the self-promotion feels icky, and I never really like asking people to buy something, but a few people have called me up and said, dude, like people I really respect, you wrote like a bang out book. You poured your heart and soul into this. This isn't like, look at me, I'm great. This is like, I had OCD. It sucked. Like, here's some shit I learned. This is some stuff I was taught from my therapist. They're like, excuse my French, like don't promote from your heels, own it. You wrote a good book. So I'm working on that. So I'm on my heels again because I'm prefacing it, but yeah, like
I could see it in your face.
I really did. I worked hard on this, and I think it's the research and writing helped me a lot. And I think it has the potential to help a lot of people.
No, it does. And look, if you work on something like this, people need it. And this isn't like some crazy sales thing. This is a legit book that I think can really impact a lot of lives. If people want to learn more about you, where do they go, Brad?
Yeah, so I'm on Twitter. That's where I live on social media, is @bstulberg. And then my website is, well, I have two. There's my personal website, which is just my name. And then more interesting is www.thegrowtheq.com.
What's that?
And that is my collaboration with Steve Magnus, another performance coach, another guest of the podcast.
Yes, sir.
I think a good friend of yours as well. And that is our little media platform on all things evidence-based well-being and sustainable success.
Love it. Brad, thank you so much for joining us today. This was a phenomenal conversation. I'm excited for the next book that you're writing because I'll be pre-ordering whenever it drops. So thank you so much for your time.
Yeah, thanks for having me on The Blueprint. I'm really glad that you're doing this project. The world needs more good conversations on the stuff that actually works.
Thank you. If you enjoyed listening to today's podcast, then you may want to check out episode number 5 with Dr. Peter Haberl. Dr. Haberl is the senior sports psychologist for the U.S. Olympic and Paralympic committees. In this episode, we discuss mindfulness and how attention is the currency of performance. Also, if you love the podcast, please follow us and leave us a comment and a review on Apple Podcasts. And let us know how we can improve the podcast. We're always ready and willing to listen. Until next time, have a great day.
Thanks for listening. You can find more episodes and all of our other Hot Pie Media originals baked fresh daily at our home online at hotpiemedia.com, the Hot Pie Media YouTube channel, or wherever you listen to podcasts.